If you think you've seen it all, you're in for a surprise, as these courtroom moments will shock you and set a new record for the dumbest moments of all time. Number 1. T.J. Lane. This is T.J. Lane, a remorseless killer who's opened fire inside the cafeteria at Chardon High School, Ohio in 2012. When T.J. Lane entered the school cafeteria at 7:30 a.m. on February 27, 2012, he was wearing a t-shirt that read "Killer," and that's exactly how he acted that day, firing shots at anyone in sight. Lane shot 5 male students and 1 female student before running out of the cafeteria, but he was tackled by a teacher and a coach as he tried to get away from the scene. The horrendous affair ended with the death of 3 students and left 2 severely injured. But that isn't the only child he harmed that day. In fact, all the kids who attended school were left traumatized for life as they tried to grapple with the violent scenes of the school shooting. T.J. Lane's complete disregard for human life became apparent from his bizarre behavior in court. Although he was quickly tried and convicted of the crime, the trial made headlines due to his lewd comments and cold behavior. At his sentencing hearing, Lane walked into court wearing a shirt that read "Killer," and if that wasn't enough, he addressed the victims' families with contempt and even stuck up his middle finger while saying,
"Same pull the trigger that killed your son, now the basic memory."
Did you know that T.J. Lane attended the same high school and was remembered as a quiet and kind kid by his class fellows? Isn't it shocking that he turned against the school for no apparent reason? The most commonly held belief to this day is that T.J. Lane was aiming for a romantic rival, but he never announced his actual motive in court. When the judge handed him 3 life sentences, 1 for each student whose life he took, T.J. Lane continued looking uninterested and completely unapologetic. In 2014, T.J. Lane escaped from the prison along with 2 inmates, but was quickly apprehended without much fanfare. He is currently serving his life sentence at the Warren Correctional Institution in Youngstown, Ohio, a supermax prison that can keep his irrational behavior in check. If you thought T.J. Lane's behavior in court was thoughtless, you'd never believe what the next convict did prior to his sentencing. Number 2. Jaleel Smith Riley. Jaleel Smith Riley pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and attempted murder in court, but decided to withdraw his plea against the advice of his attorneys. The 23-year-old man thought he could convince the judge of his good intentions by withdrawing his plea. Still, his plan failed miserably when the Hamilton County Common Pleas Judge, Charles Kubicki, rejected Smith Riley's change of heart and sentenced him to life behind bars without the possibility of parole. Smith Riley is responsible for taking a life and almost ruining another. According to records, Portia Brooks and Aaron Martin were sitting inside a parked car when Smith Riley and 2 others knocked on the window with a shotgun. He forced Martin out of the car and searched his pockets for cash and valuables, but despite his complacency, Smith Riley shot him in the head, causing permanent damage to his brain. While Martin survived his wounds, he was severely injured after the accident. Unfortunately, Smith Riley didn't stop there but continued his killing spree. After shooting Martin, he leaned into the car and fired 2 shots at Brooks, who wasn't as lucky as Martin, and succumbed to her wounds 3 days later. Tension ran high inside the courtroom before the judge announced Smith Riley's sentence. On the one hand, Smith Riley pleaded with the judge teary-eyed even though he had confessed to the crime, and on the other, Brooks's mother brought her ashes to the court.
But he killed me, mentally, emotionally. He killed my identity as a mother of 3, as a family of 4.
Her sister also addressed the court in a moving statement.
I have to deal with life without Portia, so he should deal with life without parole.
Despite Smith Riley's last-minute antics, the judge gave him a strict sentence, condemning him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As soon as the judge announced his verdict, Smith Riley collapsed to the floor, unable to maintain composure. The police pulled him to his feet, and he then interrupted Kubicki. So what does he get? No one knew who Smith Riley was referring to in his outburst. The next criminal shocked the court with his boastful behavior. Let's find out his story. Number 3. Ryan Stone. Ryan Stone was convicted of carjacking 3 vehicles, including one with a 4-year-old boy inside. The high-speed chase caught on camera made international news, and Ryan couldn't be happier about it. When talking to his friends from prison, Ryan boasted about how he had become an international sensation. He was so proud of his achievements that he wanted news channels to pay him for the exciting content he'd given them. The pursuit began in Longmont, around 30 miles north of Denver, when Stone stole a sport utility vehicle from outside a convenience store. The police were after him because he failed to appear in court on drug charges, but Stone was determined to evade capture at all costs. One after the other, Stone carjacked vehicles, abandoning the previous ones, as he led the police on a chase that sped over 100 miles per hour. The high-speed chase left several injured, including a Colorado State Patrol trooper who was struck as he attempted to deploy stop sticks to halt Stone. After ultimately crashing the third vehicle, Stone tried to get away on foot, but was arrested after a brief chase. When Ryan Stone appeared in court, he looked apologetic and distraught. The gravity of his actions had finally dawned on him, but he also understood there was no way he could make amends now. However, he tried to convince the judge that he was a changed man who could still contribute positively to society. But his phone calls from prison ruined any chances of a lenient sentence. In one of the calls, Stone blamed the state trooper for his injuries, which included a shattered leg. Stone looked shattered when the judge handed down the sentence, but it was impossible to deny the severe repercussions of his reckless actions. The Douglas County jury convicted him of 18 charges, including attempted manslaughter, first-degree assault, and child abuse. He was sentenced to 160 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 75 years, for which he will not be eligible until 2085. If you thought Stone was cold-hearted, you'd never believe the crimes our next convicts committed. Number 4. Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari. Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari are the parents of 9-month-old Mary, who died in her home due to neglect and malnutrition. According to investigators, Mary was only 8 pounds at the time of her death, and police found her body following a 911 call that Welch made on August 2, 2018. The couple refused to accept the brutality they had inflicted on their daughter and maintained that the baby was fed every 2 to 3 hours. However, their bizarre behavior after discovering the baby was unconscious raised many questions. Can you guess what the parents did after they discovered Mary was dead? Your first guess would be that the parents would rush her to the hospital and seek immediate medical attention. However, the way the events of that day unfolded shocked everyone. After finding her daughter's lifeless body in her bed, Welch called his parents, who are attorneys, and did some unrelated Google searches. After doing nothing for almost 3.5 hours, Welch called the police. Immediately after the police reached the Welch residence, both parents were brought down to the Kent County Sheriff's Office for interviews with the detective. The couple was initially charged with felony homicide murder in August 2018. In June 2020, Seth Welch was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. In 2021, Fusari testified that she had an abusive marriage and that Welch didn't believe in doctors or scientific medicine. She stressed that Mary faced a horrible fate because of her father. Regardless of her claims, Fusari was sentenced to life without parole for first-degree murder and an additional 15 to 30 years for first-degree child abuse. When the judge announced his verdict, Seth's mouth dropped open and Fusari couldn't hold back her tears. Many people feel that the couple got the sentence they deserved. And even though Fusari claimed that she was a victim of abuse, the judge didn't believe her reason was good enough to let her daughter starve to death. The drama inside the courtroom during Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari was palpable, but it was nothing compared to the sentencing of Esteban Carpio. Number 5. Esteban Carpio. When Esteban Carpio entered wearing a polyurethane mask with air holes, also called the spit shield or biter mask, the courtroom buzzed with speculation about his physical state behind it. All that could be seen were his swollen eyes, reduced to slits, and a battered forehead. Esteban's face was bloody from his injuries, and blood splats could be seen on the spit mask. Esteban was brought in for questioning at the Providence Police Headquarters for stabbing an 85-year-old woman, Madeline Gatter. As one of the detectives left the conference room to get some water, things became heated inside the third-floor interview room. Esteban somehow got hold of the other detective's gun and locked the room so he could carry out his devious plan. By the time they broke the door, Officer James Allen was already dying, and Esteban had escaped through the window. He was eventually apprehended after a brief struggle with the police, but the jump from the third floor seriously injured Esteban, which explains his unusual appearance in court. However, Esteban's family erupted in protests as he entered the courtroom. They claimed that the mask was an attempt by the police to hide the violence he'd been exposed to. They believed he was brutally beaten up as revenge for killing one of their own. While many others also questioned the need for the mask, the police maintained that he had suffered the injuries from the escape attempt. What do you think happened to Esteban Carpio? Share your views in the comments. Esteban was sentenced to life without parole, but showed little remorse as the verdict was read out. However, later Esteban tried to make up for his lack of emotion by giving a teary-eyed speech in court, apologizing for his actions. But the judge didn't care for his change of heart and maintained his verdict. If you thought these trials were disturbing, you'd be shocked by the courtroom drama of these celebrities.